What is the difference between actual and estimated mean? Well, in statistics, the mean or average is used to calculate, well, the average. Now, it is easy to calculate the actual average or mean when you have ungrouped data. However, if you have grouped data, it is more difficult to calculate the actual mean since we don't have actual data points or actual values to work from. So estimated mean is usually used when we have grouped data. Now in this video, I want to show you that the method for calculating the estimated mean using group data is still a good approximation, even though it may be slightly different. So let's take a look at the data points on the left-hand side of the screen. Let's assume that these are marks that a learner got for 20 tests over the course of a year. And these are percentages over 100. So you can see that the scores range from 55 all the way to 99. There's one mark where the learner had a score in the 50s. There were a few in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s as well. One thing to note is that the scores in the 80s seem to be skewed to one side, to the lower end of that 80 range. Now, that can have an effect on some of the statistical values that we calculate. So let's go ahead and calculate the average for these data points. So remember, to calculate the average, you add up all the data points. So average is going to equal the sum of all the data points divided by the number of data points. So if you add up all of these values, you're going to get 1,587 and divided by, there's 20 data points, and that gives us an average of 79.35. This is the actual average. Now, let's assume these data points were hidden from us and all we had was the table on the right hand side. Now the table will need to be completed for us to be able to calculate the estimated average. So what should be done? So first we need intervals, and the intervals would be according to the marks that the learner got. So for example, we could have an interval from 50 to 59. Then we could have from 60 to 69. Then 70 to 79, 80 to 89, and then 90 to 99. The column F means frequency. So in other words, how many data points were there in that specific interval? So 50 to 59, there was 1. 60 to 69, there was 4. 70 to 79, there's 5. 80 to 89, there's also 5. And 90 to 99, there's 5 as well. Now this is all we actually need to estimate an average. So let's assume that this is hidden from us. How do we go about calculating the estimated average? Well, the first thing we need to do is calculate or write down the midpoint for each interval. Now the midpoint for each interval can be calculated by adding the upper limit and the lower limit and dividing by 2. So 59 plus 50 divided by 2. That gives us 54.5. And this is the midpoint. The next one is 64.5. Then 74.5, 84.5, and then 94.5. The last thing we need to do to fill in that column is to do the frequency times the midpoint. So frequency times midpoint. So 1 times 54.5, that's 54.5. Then 4 times 64.5, that's 258. Then 74.5 times 5 is 372.5. The next one is going to be 422.5, and then 472.5. Now we're nearly done. All we got to do is add up all of these and all of these. If you add up all of this, you're going to get 20. There were 20 values. And if you add up all of that, you are going to get 1,580. Notice it is slightly different. That's why it's an estimate. It's an estimated average. So now we can say that the estimated average is going to equal 1,580 divided by 20, which is equal to 79, which is not too far off from the actual value. Now, if you continue this this exercise, you could calculate Q1, you could calculate Q2, the median, you could also calculate Q3. And you'd notice, or you'd find, that the data that you find from the actual values and the estimates are not too far off. So even though it's not exactly the average, it may not be exactly the Q1, Q2, or Q3 values, if you don't have another option, if you have been given the grouped data, these are still a good approximation. Thanks so much for watching.